House of the Dragon stays pretty true to Fire and Blood, but that doesn't mean there aren't some major differences. In this video, we will go over 15 or so changes the show makes and how that has impacted the story. Now, admittedly, there are more than 15, so if there are some important ones that we've missed, sound off in the comments. But anyway, let's get going. And yes, there will be spoilers for House of the Dragon Season 1 in this video. Let's start with the queen who never was, Rhaenys. In the show, we are led to believe that the primary two candidates to succeed the old king Jaehaerys are Rhaenys, the daughter of Jaehaerys' oldest son Aemond, and Viserys, the son of Balon, who is one of Jaehaerys' other children. Both Aemond and Balon died before their father, causing the line of succession to fall into doubt. While Rhaenys should have been the first in line to the throne, Jaehaerys ultimately decides to choose Viserys as a successor, due to the fact that the lords of Westeros wouldn't rally around a woman. Now, while Rhaenys is next in line to the throne in the book, and Viserys is picked instead, Rhaenys was actually never close to becoming queen. In fact, she was dismissed out of hand for being a woman, and the contest for the crown was actually between Viserys and Rhaenys and Corlys' son Laenor Velaryon. Another major change in regards to Rhaenys is her hair color. In the show, she is seen with typical Targaryen features, such as the silvery blonde hair, but in the book, she is actually dark of hair like her Baratheon ancestors. As we know, the Baratheon hair color is a dominant trait, and it is the reason why Ned and Robert Arryn learned that Joffrey and his siblings aren't Robert's true children. One of the major plot points in House of the Dragon is when Alicent misinterprets Viserys' reference to the Song of Ice and Fire as him wanting to install Aegon as the king of Westeros. This sets about the dramatic events of episode 9 and the build-up to the Dance of Dragons. The thing is, this never happened in the book. In fact, the Song of Ice and Fire isn't mentioned once, and it wasn't a prophecy that Viserys passed down to Rhaenyra. Alicent's motives for wanting Aegon to become king are much more simple and self-serving in the book.
Aegon should succeed him!
With her claiming that he had the stronger claim. It's almost as if HBO were trying to give purpose to Season 8 by adding the prophecy in House of the Dragon. In terms of character changes, Viserys is arguably the character that is the most different in the show than how he's portrayed in the book. While both book Viserys and show Viserys are weak-willed and ill-equipped to rule, the show Viserys is a much more tragic character, and one who seems to have a perpetual headache as he tries to maintain the status quo. The book version is arguably more similar to Robert Baratheon, with the Fire and Blood Viserys enjoying a lavish lifestyle, with a strong appetite for food and wine, and a slightly more jovial personality. However, this change from the book is actually an example of times when on-screen adaptations are better, with George R.R. Martin even texting actor Paddy Considine to say that his version of Viserys was better than his own version of Viserys. But I mean, what did he expect? Paddy Considine was one of the Andys in Hot Fuzz. One of the biggest character omissions in House of the Dragon is that of Mushroom, although there is a cameo from a character that does look like him. In Fire and Blood, Mushroom is a dwarf who serves as a fool for a number of Targaryen monarchs, and due to his closeness to the House of the Dragon, he acts as an amateur historian, providing a tertiary account of events. For context for all non-book readers, Fire and Blood reads as a history book, with there being multiple sources and accounts on events, with Mushroom being one of the main ones. Admittedly though, his descriptions of events are much more salacious than that of the Maesters, so his words have to be taken with a bit more than a pinch of salt. However, without these conflicting perspectives, the show is far less ambiguous than the book, and much more cut and dry. For example, the deaths of Harwin and Lionel Strong. In the show, it is very clear that Larys ordered the fire at Harrenhal to kill off his father and brother to cement himself as the head of House Strong and position himself as an important ally for Alicent. In the book, it is much more ambiguous as to who started the fire. Larys is certainly one of the suspects, but other contenders include Daemon, who some believe was trying to kill off a love rival. Others say it was Viserys who ordered the murder to protect his daughter's reputation. There are some who speculate it was the Sea Snake to get revenge for Harwin cuckolding his son, while some even say it was Harrenhal itself, with the castle said to be cursed, but no one truly knows who really did it. Is there any way to get Benoit Blanc on the case? Speaking of deaths, let's talk about the deaths of the Velaryon family members Laenor, well, fake death in his case, Laena and Vaemond in the book. Starting with Laenor, who did die for real in the book, and was killed by Sir Qarl after the two got in a fight in Spicetown after Qarl became jealous of Laenor's new male escort. Although there is some speculation that Daemon orchestrated the whole thing. Laena's death was also different, as firstly she was on Dragonstone, not Pentos, when she gave birth, and she actually successfully gave birth, but the child ended up dying, before she went to fly her dragon one last time after becoming sick. However, she was found dead on her way to the dragons, as opposed to being burnt alive by Vhagar. Vaemond's death differs, as instead of Viserys ordering for his death after he insulted Rhaenyra and her children, it is Rhaenyra herself who orders it, with Daemon killing Vaemond and then feeding him to his dragon. Also, Vaemond is Corlys' nephew in the book, not his brother. Speaking of Corlys, in the book, it wasn't him that suggested that Viserys marry his daughter Laena after the death of Emma, but it was instead Grand Maester Runesetter, who has been omitted from the show. Also, Corlys leaving the Small Council was different in the book, and in fact, he was never a part of the Small Council after Viserys was crowned, as he was annoyed at the Great Council's decision to name him king in the first place. Also, and this is just subjective, but in my opinion, Corlys hasn't been as badass as he is in the book, with more of the focus being on Daemon, but I'll give it time. While we see a period in the show where Alicent and Rhaenyra were friends, with there even being a subtle hint that they were more than that, this dynamic between the two characters doesn't exist in the book. In fact, the two only started interacting with one another after Alicent married Viserys, and part of the reason is because there is a 9-year age gap between them in the book. It is also not mentioned in the show, but in the book, Alicent was also close to the old King Jaehaerys, and would read to him while he was on his deathbed, and there were rumors that Jaehaerys in his delusion believed that Alicent was his daughter, and they even had a sexual relationship. Yuck. There is even some suggestion that Alicent had relationships with Daemon and even Viserys before they were married, but let's not open that can of worms. In episode 9, Otto fully revealed his true colors and the fact he was secretly scheming for years to implant Aegon as king, drawing up a plan to usurp the throne. However, his desire to name Aegon as heir is much less secretive in the book, and he is constantly pushing Viserys to name Aegon as his successor. In fact, that is the reason why Viserys ended up firing him as Hand of the King, not the fact that he implied that Rhaenyra was no longer a maiden like in the show, with Otto actually fired long before the scandal. Speaking of that scandal, that is also surrounded in ambiguity in the book. One account states that Daemon seduced Rhaenyra, and when the two were caught together, she begged Viserys to let her marry her uncle, while Mushroom claims that Daemon had been teaching Rhaenyra about sex so she would be able to seduce her Sir Criston Cole. Speaking of Sir Criston, he becomes the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard after Sir Harrold Westerling vacates his position after being ordered to go to Dragonstone and kill the woman he was sworn to protect, Rhaenyra.
Sir Crispin, wasn't it?
Sir Criston Cole, my prince.
Ah, yes, apologies. I couldn't recall.
However, this never happens in the book. In fact, at this point, Harrold Westerling has been long since dead, with him dying 2 years before the marriage of Laena and Rhaenyra, giving him a completely different plotline than in the book. Now, this is actually also a difference in Game of Thrones in the book as well, but the Iron Throne is still nowhere near the size that it is portrayed in the book. While the throne in House of the Dragon is bigger than the one in Game of Thrones, it is still not the towering monstrosity that it is in the book, with it standing at 40 feet high with a throne room the size of St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. Also, the Targaryen eyes in the books are purple, but they are much more conventional in the show. In the show, Viserys has been portrayed to be in poor health for some time as he slowly decays in front of our eyes, with him likely suffering from leprosy. Viserys' health in the show really took a turn at Laena and Rhaenyra's wedding, collapsing as the two are wed before he begins losing legs and eyes as the years roll by. While Viserys isn't in the best of health in the book, with him suffering from gout and other ailments, it is nowhere near as severe as in the show. For example, Viserys is at death's door in the unifying feast in episode 8 as he wants to dine with his family one last time. But in the book, the feast was actually to celebrate his health improving after he suffered from an infection after he fell and slashed his arm on the Iron Throne. Also, after his death, the Greens' reaction is much more slow-moving, with the Greens leaving his corpse for over a week before they made their first play as Viserys' body slowly rotted away. In the show, Daemon's conquest of the Stepstones was used as proof of his wild nature, with Daemon jumping into a war he was ill-equipped for before running through the Crab Feeder's army and slicing him in half. However, you can guess what I'm going to say. This is different from the book. In fact, Fire and Blood barely acknowledges the war, stating, "It is not our purpose here to recount the details of the private war Daemon Targaryen and Corlys Velaryon waged on the Stepstones. What readers do learn is that Viserys showered Daemon with gold to keep him out of the way, which led to Daemon winning most battles and eventually saw him beheading the Crab Feeder." Speaking of Daemon going rogue, his 10th showdown on Dragonstone with Otto after he stole a dragon egg is also just a fabrication of the show. While Daemon does steal a dragon egg to give to Mysaria, Viserys orders his brother to return the egg and to send Mysaria away, to which Daemon begrudgingly accepts. However, Mysaria, who is pregnant in the book, loses her child on her journey, causing Daemon to grow angry with his brother. One of the most badass moments in the show is when Helena's prophecy of the beast beneath the floorboards comes true, as Rhaenys bursts through the floor of Aegon's coronation on Dragonback and gives the Greens a terrifying stare down. However, this sadly never happens in the book, and Aegon's coronation is much more smooth sailing. For instance, Aegon going missing before his coronation and there being a hunt to find him is also created exclusively for the show, but it did a great job of creating friction between Alicent and Otto. And finally, another moment never to happen in the book is the lavish hunt for the White Hart that takes place to celebrate Aegon's birth. Now, while there is a celebration of sorts in the book, it is never described in anywhere near as much detail, making the events with the boar, Viserys depressingly killing a deer, and the moment between Rhaenyra and the White Hart a fabrication of the show. And just a quick one to end the video on. After Aemond loses an eye after a scuffle with Jason Luke, an angry Alicent goes to get revenge with the famous cat's paw dagger, but instead ends up cutting her former bestie, Rhaenyra, in the arm. While Aemond did lose his eye in this fashion in the book, the scene after it never happened, but it was just deliciously tense, wasn't it? So that's 15 of the biggest changes from the book that we noticed. Now, we'd love to hear what you think. Are there any changes we missed? Do you think the changes help the overall story and show? Sound off in the comments below.